Have you ever wondered why north shows on top of maps and south below? In the second session of the series, we will continue the discussion about the real reason why maps show Europe on top, and then talk about some of the mysterious and strange creatures found on ancient maps. For those who have not heard part 1, the link will be in the description. Now let's dig into this. This article from manoahawaii.edu says, most maps of Earth have north at the top, so north is up. However, this map orientation is arbitrary. Putting north at the top of maps became standard when European exploration was at its height in the 16th century. This might have been because Europeans navigated using the North Star and magnetic compasses, or it might just have been because they liked to keep themselves at the top of the world. Regardless, map orientation with north at the top has led people to refer to places as being above or below others. People also say that they travel up or down to visit these locations because people often assume height correlates with importance. The North Up Convention reinforces the idea that countries or people in the North are more important than those in the South. When the South Pole is rotated so that it is up on a map, the unfamiliar orientation forces people to view the world from a fresh perspective. Now, this is a key point to understand whether you believe that the Earth is a sphere or flat. The directional points are important. They help us orientate and position ourselves on Earth. We use them all the time when traveling. Let's look at this article from Nautical Channel entitled, What are the Cardinal Points? Their Origin and Importance. This says the cardinal points are the main references we use to orient ourselves on Earth, indicating the directions of north, south, east, and west. These directions are important for navigation. They have also been key in areas like geography, cartography, and astronomy throughout history. Their use has deep roots in human history. Early civilizations such as the Egyptians and the Chinese observed the movements of the sun and stars to orient themselves. It says, in the field of nautical navigation, the invention of the compass in ancient China was a revolutionary breakthrough. This tool helped sailors find the magnetic north. They no longer relied solely on observing the stars. So this is telling us that the ancients were using the stars. It says this made long voyages easier and enabled the exploration of new lands. So our takeaway from that article is that the ancients did not rely on magnetic north for navigation. So what were they using? Let's look at this article from the archaeologist. It's talking about the role of astronomy in ancient navigation. It says for millennia, ancient sailors relied on the stars, sun, and natural landmarks to navigate vast oceans and unknown territories. Long before the invention of modern navigational tools, seafarers developed sophisticated methods to determine their location and chart their courses using celestial bodies. Archaeological evidence and historical texts provide valuable insights into how astronomy played a crucial role in maritime exploration and trade. One of the most reliable methods of ancient navigation was using the stars. The North Star, or Polaris, was a critical reference point for sailors in the northern hemisphere, as it remained fixed in the sky, indicating true north. The Phoenicians, renowned maritime traders, used constellations such as Ursa Minor and Orion's Belt to traverse the Mediterranean and beyond. The Polynesians also mastered star-based navigation, memorizing star charts and using them to guide their journeys across the vast Pacific Ocean. It goes on to tell us that the sun was another essential navigational tool. By observing its position during the day, sailors could estimate direction and latitude. The ancient Greeks and Romans used a simple technique called noon shadow navigation, measuring the length of shadows to determine their position relative to the equator. The Vikings, who sailed across the North Atlantic, are believed to have used sun compasses and possibly sun tones, crystals that helped locate the sun's position even on cloudy days. While celestial navigation was crucial for open sea voyages, sailors also relied on coastal landmarks and environmental cues when navigating closer to land. Mountain ranges, islands, and distinctive rock formations were used as reference points. Additionally, ocean currents, wind patterns, and bird migration routes provided valuable guidance. The ancient Egyptians, for example, carefully documented seasonal winds to aid their journeys along the Nile and beyond. Now let's look at this article from Geospatial World, and we will see that something happened to cause modern maps to consistently point to north on top. This says very early Egyptian maps show south on top. I'll drop down. It says the Chinese, who were the first to invent the compass, also often drew maps with south on top, because they always thought the compass pointed to south. So who invented the compass? It was the Chinese. Now let's deviate to this article from Ancient Origins for a few minutes to look at this information about how the Chinese compass revolutionized navigation. And then we'll go back to the Geospatial World article. This says the compass, as we know it today, is believed to have emerged in China during the Han Dynasty. However, the roots of the compass can be traced back even further to the Warring States period, where the Chinese initially discovered the magnetic properties of certain stones known as iota stones. These stones, naturally occurring magnets made of magnetite, exhibited a property known as magnetism, attracting iron objects and aligning themselves with the Earth's magnetic field. It says the earliest Chinese literature reference to magnetism lies in the 4th century BC writings of Wang Zhu, who lived during the late Warring States period. He correctly observes that the iota stone attracts iron. So this book that was written by Wang Zhu mentions that the people of the state of Xing always knew their position using a south pointer. Some scholars suggest that this is a reference to the early use of the compass. Let's go on. It says quickly, the industrious ancient Chinese scholars and inventors realized that the naturally occurring iota stone, magnetized mineral, carries incredible significance and potential. Soon they began shaping it and observing its properties. In ancient Chinese texts, we find many references to this mineral. In a Chinese work composed between 70 and 80 AD, it is written that when the south-pointing spoon is thrown upon the ground, it comes to rest pointing at the south. The spoon refers to the ladle shape in which the iota stone was formed. The base of the ladle rested on a flat surface, and the short handle swung always to point to the south. Soon enough, this earliest rudimentary form of a compass was called in ancient China as South Governor or South pointing fish. So the original invention was designed to locate true south. Later, another Chinese inventor improved the design and it revolutionized maritime navigation because the original spoon could only indicate the south direction. The new compass could determine any cardinal direction. Now let's go back to the article from Geospatial World to see how European explorers would later use this. So it says, even map makers in Arabia often drew maps with south on top. So we had the Egyptians and the Chinese showing south on top, and now we see that the Arabs had south on top as well. It says the Islamic maps favored south since the initial Islamic habitations were north of Mecca. So a south-oriented map would show the followers looking up towards it. Now listen to this. Europeans learnt map making from the Arabs, and things started changing with the age of exploration somewhere in the Mediterranean regions, the link between Europe and Arabia. However, the 14th and 15th century navigational maps charting out sea routes, which were designed for the mariners, had no real top or bottom. They had pictures and words pointing at all directions with a compass rose and north clearly distinguished. So the author is asking this question: would it be right to credit explorers like Columbus or Magellan for the north side up maps? He said apparently no, because Broughton, and we're talking about Jerry Broughton, a map historian from Queen Mary University in London, he believes when Columbus sets on his journey, he believes he's going to paradise, and hence, in his worldview, east was on top. It says it is actually somewhere in the 16th century with modern European imperialism at its peak and the great influence of their civilization across the world that made the map Europe-centric and hence north on top. While the Chinese referred to their first magnetic compass as south pointing, by the time Europeans came to adopt it, they were already experienced in navigating by referring to the North Star, the only fixed star in the northern hemisphere. For mariners, the compass was just an artificial replacement for the star. And since Europe was situated in the northern hemisphere, which already had more landmass to be explored, north up maps became a standard. Let's go on. Now, if you'll remember from the last session, this is the way the world would have looked to the ancients. North was down and south was up. So Nordic countries would have been in the north or at the bottom of the map. As you can see, countries like Russia, Greenland, and Iceland, they were situated, or they are situated, in the colder climates. So we really have to force ourselves to look at it from the right perspective. North was down and south was up. The lower parts of the earth was the far north, or what was called the end of the earth. So these Nordic countries would have been in the north or at the bottom of the map. Now we're going to look at some of the strange and mysterious creatures in ancient times. Let's begin by looking at this article from History Collection entitled Where the Wild Things Weren't. A dozen map monsters from history. Now, we're not going to look at them all. I'm just going to highlight a few of them, but you're welcome to look them up on your own. But just looking at this, you can see that the ancients were seeing some weird looking creatures. Let's talk about sea serpents. It says sea serpents or dragons have been a feature of mythology since the Mesopotamian era. In Mesopotamian belief, Tiamat is the goddess of the sea, often depicted as a sea serpent. In ancient Greece, we have Scylla of the Odyssey and the multiple-headed Hydra that Hercules slays. The Hebrew Bible and Christian Old Testament also refer to sea serpents, such as the Tannin in Genesis 1:21 and the sea monster mentioned in Amos 9:3. Despite their differing cultural meanings and allegorical resonances at their core, all of these sea serpents reveal a deeper anxiety about the dangers of the deep. We can also see here in Isaiah 27:1 that yes, Scripture has referenced large sea serpents or dragons. This says, "In that day the Most High, with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, that twisted serpent, and he will slay the reptile that is in the sea." Now, when you consider that the majority of the deep ocean has not been explored, you can't say for certain that they were not seeing strange sea creatures in those days. And lately, we've been seeing a lot of reports about strange creatures washing up on beaches around the world. Let's go back to the article. It says specific sea monsters outside of the world of religion and myth are recorded as far back as Aristotle's Historia Animalium. Strabo's Geography also reports a dead sea serpent seen by the appropriately named Poseidonus, the fallen dragon, the corpse of which was about a plethorium or 100 feet in length, and so bulky that horsemen standing by it on either side could not see one another, and its jaws were large enough to admit a man on horseback, and each flake of its horny scales exceeded an oblong shield in length. Sightings have continued ever since, suggesting a man's innate fear of seas. Without doubt, the weirdest map monsters were the Blemye. The Blemye were headless men who had their faces in their chests. It says, so old is the headless men tradition that there is no certain etymology of the term Blemye, though it may come from the Hebrew for without brains. Herodotus in the 5th century BC tells us that in Libya live headless men that have their eyes in their chests. But they are first called Blemye by Strabo about 500 years later. So you can see the picture on the right. Very strange indeed. Again, reported to have their eyes in their chests and their mouths in the middle of their breasts. And they had a long chain of hair growth backwards behind the shoulders, according to Sir Riley, who located the creatures in Guyana, South America. Let's look at some more depictions of them from the Public Domain Review collection. The collection is called Off with Their Heads, Illustrations of Blemyes from 1175 to 1724. Now, considering their skin color, it's hard to believe that they were living in hot climates, unless it was underground. But look at this. Is this experimentation gone wrong? I mean, really. When you look at these creatures, it makes you think about the passages in the book of Enoch, talking about how they were splicing DNA to create hybrid beings, similar to what they're doing today. So it's not impossible. We're looking at strange and stranger. Again, when you look at the lack of melanin in these creatures, you have to wonder if this is pointing back to the descendants of the fallen. What's interesting is that some of these things were depicted on ancient maps, and we're going to look at them later. But let's finish reading the article from History Collection. Now we're going to look at the Cyclops, and you thought it couldn't get any stranger. Well, the article says the desert is full of unusual creatures which have evolved peculiar ways of surviving in such an inhospitable place. The fennec fox, for example, has large ears to dissipate heat, and the Gila monster can live off the fat in its tail underground for months at a time. Thus, it is no surprise to find that a strange group of monsters were believed by the ancients to live in the desert, called Cyclops. Another name for them are the shadow-foots, because in the hotter weather they lie on their backs on the ground and protect themselves with the shadow of their feet. This is according to Pliny the Elder in his book Natural History. It says the single umbrella foot acted not only for shade but also, paradoxically, made the cyclopod extremely fast moving. Pliny also tells us that cyclopods are able to leap with surprising agility, and other sources such as Isidore note the incredible speed of these hops. So here you see this cyclopod. He's sitting on its bottom, holding its calf so as to keep the oversized foot over its head. The article goes on to talk about giants, and I've talked about giants in previous sessions, so no surprises about this one. But the article says, since the dawn of time, tales have been told of giant races of people living on the fringes of civilization. In pagan religious beliefs, the giants were usually the antagonists of the pantheon of gods. In Greek mythology, they attacked Mount Olympus, home of the gods, and were defeated with the help of Hercules. In Norse mythology, the giants, also called Jotnar, are depicted as being incredibly stupid. Along with their stupidity, giants are depicted in Western Christian tradition as arrogant, proud, and generally excessive in all sins. Christian thought also believed that giants are the descendants of Cain, the world's first murderer. They said Cain mated with wild beasts in the land where he was exiled, and then his half-man, half-beast daughters, who were very beautiful, mated with fallen angels, and that's how giants were born. I think we know why that tale was invented, but it goes on to say, usually giants are encountered by travelers in far-off places, but when a giant inhabits civilized areas, it is unnatural, and the menacing giant must be killed. And then it talks about the story regarding King Arthur and the giant of Mont Saint Michael, where this giant was attacking young girls and gorging on livestock from local farmers. So it says that King Arthur defeats the giant in single combat and beheads him. Now the question is being asked, so why are giants appearing on maps? And it's saying when they are depicted superficially, human giants are always shown at the margins of the unknown, where civilized people do not live. Now, mermaids and sirens are also depicted on ancient maps. The mermaids are the half woman, half fish. It says the first known story of mermaids dates from Assyria around 1000 BC. Usually they are shown immodestly clothed, and they are known to seduce foolish sailors. It says people genuinely believe that mermaids were real creatures. And it talks about an incredible story that happened in Orford, Suffolk, where fishermen caught a merman, which is a male mermaid. It was like a man and all of its members, but showed a preference for raw fish and had incredible swimming abilities. It would not talk even under torture, and eventually it was released. Now let's look at how these hybrid creatures were depicted on the maps. This information comes from Live Science. Here you see a giant sea serpent attacking a ship off the coast of Norway on Olaus Magnus's Carta Marina of 1539. This image is from the 1572 edition. This is the entire map, and there's a lot to see on this map. In this session, we focused on the hybrid creatures, but we also want to look at the people who were in this area and see if there's a connection to this sudden need to take over Greenland. We'll go over it on the live this coming Wednesday at 8 p.m., so be sure to join me for that. So the article says that the iconic sea serpents, mermaids, and other mythical creatures found on world maps from medieval and Renaissance times can be found in a book by Chet Van Duzer. It says these creatures adorned atlases from the 10th through the 17th century. Despite their wild appearance, many of these creatures were based on real animals. And that is what many find hard to believe, that these things were real. Here you can clearly see a merman and a mermaid. Was it just a myth? Now look at this map. You can clearly see a large sea serpent. Look at where the arrow is pointing. This map is showing things from Scythia. Now on the left you see the skyopods, on the right you see the blemnies that we talked about earlier, and you also have a cynocephaly. It's a creature with the body of a human and the head of a dog. Now if you find all of this hard to believe, let's look at this from Historic Mysteries, and then we'll go back to the article from the collector. What do you see here? It says the imagination of cultures across time has produced a wide range of mythical beasts such as dragons and minotaurs. Not a fact known to many are the many tales of dog-headed men from different cultures around the world. The proper name for this phenomenon is cynocephaly. Cynocephaly is not a werewolf, but a creature or god with the head of a dog or jackal and the body of a human. China, India, Egypt, Greece, and medieval Europe all have stories of cynocephaly in their myths and legends. Well, is it really a myth? I think not. And if this is just a myth, why did the Catholic Church include these things in their iconography? Look at this. On the left, you see a dog-headed Saint Christopher. They made this hybrid being a saint. Listen to what this says. Even the elders of the Catholic Church believed such beings existed. St. Augustine pondered in his writings if dog-headed men were held to the same moral laws as humankind and if they could be saved. So not so far-fetched after all. Let's go back to the article. So the collector article says, the creatures look purely fantastic. That's not the word I would use, but Van Duzer, a map historian at the Library of Congress, said they all look like they were just made up. But in fact, a lot of them come from what were considered at the time scientific sources. The article goes on to say that sea monsters on maps run the gamut from menacing sea serpents to improbable lionfish hybrids. He said many cartographers simply copied these sea monsters from illustrated encyclopedias. Now, I know a lot of you are probably shaking your head right now, but you tell me, are all of these things just myths and fairy tales? We were told that giants and trolls were myths. And let's just refer to Scripture. We know that David defeated a giant. Where did the giant come from? There was Og and his brothers and many more. Are these things proving Genesis 6 and the things found in the book of Enoch to be true? That may be why these folks are trying to keep these things hidden. I mean, if we are to discount weird-looking creatures, we need to stop reading the book of Revelation too. Let's look at this from Revelation 9, 1 through 10. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of Yah on their foreheads. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days men will seek death and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The shape of the locust was like horses prepared for battle. On their foreheads or on their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. And they had breastplates like breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months. Where did it say these things came from? From the bottomless pit. These locusts had faces like the faces of men, and hair like women's hair. Just pause and think on that. Let's look at this passage found in Jubilees 7:21 through 24. It says, "For owing to these 3 things came the flood upon the earth, namely, owing to the fornication, wherein the watchers against the law of their ordinances went a-whoring after the daughters of men, and took themselves wives of all which they chose." And for those who may not know, the watchers are angels. Some of them mated with the daughters of men. It says, "And they made the beginning of uncleanness, and they begat sons, the Nephidim," or the Nephilim, "and they were all unalike." Let's just pause right there. The Nephilim, it says, were all unalike. Why? Was it because of the incompatibility of the mixing of 2 different species? It says they were all unalike, and they devoured one another, and the giant slew the Nephil, and the Nephil slew the Eljo, and the Eljo mankind, and one man another, and everyone sold himself to work iniquity and to shed much blood, and the earth was filled with iniquity. And after this they sinned against the beasts and birds and all that moves and walks on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth, and every imagination and desire of men imagined vanity and evil continually. So what exactly does it mean that they sinned against the beasts and birds and all that moves and walks on the earth? It had to be more than just eating them. The ancients saw weird creatures with human parts, like a man with the head of a dog. How do you explain that? Was this the result of them sinning against the animals? All of these strange looking hybrids came from somewhere. So yes, there's a lot more to dig into, but we will end it here. If this message has been a blessing to you, please hit the like and share. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. Join me next time.